What's going on, guys? So today we are actually going to be talking about something that you don't see very often anymore, especially with the newer cars, and that is drum brakes. Now, drum brakes are definitely something that has gone by the wayside, and we'll explain a few of the differences and why that is in just a second, but we're actually going to be doing the drum brakes on this Wrangler in the rear, because most of these Wranglers up until like 2004, you could actually get a disc brake rear in these, or you could special order a disc brake rear. But we're actually going to go through and we're going to do this entire rear brake job, and we're going to show you step by step how to do these, because like I said, you don't see them very often. So let's get you guys set up here. Hopefully this light lasts for a little while. But this is going to be really tough because it's hard to get in here, but I can kind of show you guys the components of all these things just to give you an idea what you're working with. So in a drum brake system, you have two brake shoes. You have a shoe on the front and a shoe on the back. You have a wheel cylinder that sits right in here, and what that does is it pushes out on the top of these shoes. Now when these shoes get pushed out, they get pushed up against this drum, the inside of this drum. So the drum sits like this over top of the brake shoes, and then when you push the brake, it actually pushes on this wheel cylinder and then ultimately pushes the brake pads out, sets them up against the drum, creates friction, and you stop. Now, these were used big time in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that entire era, and they were used both front and rear. Now, the benefit of drum brakes is that you have a massive amount of surface area dedicated specifically to stopping the rotational motion of the wheels. So just for instance, this is a front brake pad, and you guys can definitely tell that this pad is way less significant size-wise than this entire brake shoe is right here. And if you take a peek on the side over here, you'll see just how much friction material there is on the shoe versus on the pad. It's significantly more. So they were used quite widely on cars and trucks, and they're still actually used very much on heavy duty equipment like 18-wheelers and dump trucks and things of that nature. And simply because you have so much surface area for stopping, you literally almost have a 360-degree surface area to actually get everything to brake. Now, the problem with drum brakes is that everything you see here gets contained behind a cast iron brake rotor or brake drum. Everything you see here gets hidden behind this cast iron brake drum. That cast iron brake drum, after a few applications of the brakes, gets extremely hot. And in the end, when they get extremely hot, the brakes will fade and you'll lose braking force. Now, this is fine if you're using heavy equipment or large equipment that's only doing 55 or 60 miles an hour and is only coming to a stop at the very end of its cycle. It has Jake brakes and all kinds of other stuff to slow it down. Then they're great. But for a passenger car where you're on and off the brakes, you're constantly in traffic, you're stuck doing this, stuck doing that, on the brakes, off the brakes, these will heat up eventually and you will lose braking force because the brakes will fade from the heat. So basically they went to a disc brake system, which most of you are probably familiar with. Disc brake systems use a cast iron rotor, a caliper, and pads that squeeze either side of that rotor. So they go over the rotor and they squeeze that rotor. The rotors are vented. They stay cooler, and that is why everybody feels that disc brakes are better, is because they stay cooler, they don't fade as quickly, and you know, you get better overall performance when it comes to longevity, braking force, all that other stuff. However, with a good drum brake system that is kept cool, the braking force is very hard to match because, again, you have almost 360 degrees of contact patch around that drum. So when these shoes get splayed out against the drum, there's a lot of force there. Now, another one of the inherent problems with drum brakes is the adjustment. So these do require adjustment. You know, when you change your oil or what have you, you sometimes have to adjust the brakes. Now they do have auto adjusters, and I can show you how the auto adjuster works in this particular setup. Right about yonder, right here, is what they call the star wheel. This wheel turns in either direction and either spreads out or brings these together. Then you have this little guy right here that pivots and moves. So every time you hit the brakes and this brake shoe moves, there's a little cable that runs all the way up into there. It runs all the way up to the top here. That little cable is connected to the auto adjuster, and every time you go in reverse and these things move around, it pulls up on this guy, which contacts the adjuster. The adjuster spins and tightens the brakes. So as the brakes wear down, they auto tighten. However, those auto adjusters are pretty flawed. They don't necessarily have a whole lot of good stuff about them. So it's a good idea, through the back of the backing plate here, there is a little rubber plug that I'll pull out right now. And that little rubber plug allows you access to that star wheel so that you can then come in and manually adjust your brakes. And we'll do that after we're done with the brake job, but there's the little rubber plug that covers up the hole. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go over the components real quick. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to go over the components real quick. You have a front brake shoe, a rear brake shoe. You have a front spring, a rear spring. You have a spring at the very bottom that holds the bottom half of this together. You have the star wheel adjuster that I just showed you guys. You have the auto adjustment little lever here, the cable that runs up into the top section. Then you have 2 pins with springs that hold the actual shoes onto the backing plate, and then you have the wheel cylinder. So now, one of the things that I can recommend to you guys is, before you do these, grab your phone, snap a picture. That picture will tell you 1,000 things about how this goes back together, because you're going to see when we start to take this apart on this rear shoe also contains the parking brake mechanism. So when you pull your parking brake, there's a mechanical mechanism in here that spreads these shoes out to lock your parking brake in place so that your vehicle doesn't disappear when you're not looking. So the first thing we have to do with these is we have to take these 2 springs off, and then we'll take all the auto adjustment stuff off, and then I'll show you how you get these little spring clips off of here. So now they do make a tool for these springs, but I found that just using a pair of needle nose vice grips and pushing, you can get the spring right off. So that spring will come out, and I don't have to keep these parts organized because I've done this 1,000 times, but it's definitely a super good idea to keep all these springs and everything organized so that you don't lose them. Because I mean, you do have the guide for the auto adjuster cable comes with that spring, so you can just keep it on that spring and then you know where it goes. Here's the auto adjustment cable. You can just take that right off of there. Then there's this little cross-shaped guy right here that will pop off, and that'll allow you to get the shoes off easier. And then we have the 2 springs, and those 2 springs utilize a little tool like this, and it's just tapered in here, and you go from, you know, behind the backing plate, and you can feel where the pin is. You go in here and you twist this 90 degrees, and then the spring pops off of the little, you know, this little guy right here, and you can see it's slotted. And we'll do the same on the other side. And then now, if we're lucky, we can kind of just spread these at the top and pull the whole assembly out. And again, there is your parking brake setup, and your parking brake setup actually threads into this little slot right here. So now what we have to do is we have to pull the rest of this stuff off of here. So now this guy pulls up, it slides down. We just lost the cable. And we may actually have to get the spring off of here first before we can do that. All right, so let's just take this spring off. There we go, relieve some tension on that guy. Then we can get off our auto adjuster. And we can take our spring for the auto adjuster. Then we can take our spring that holds the shoes together here. Take that guy off, and then we can remove the shoes from the adjuster. That was a close one. All right, so here's the auto adjuster, or not the auto adjuster, but the star wheel adjuster that is part of the auto adjuster mechanism. So what you can see is that this rotates inside here. This rotates, but also extends as you thread it. So as the star wheel spins, you can tighten or loosen your brake shoes. And then you have your, this thing all sits in here. And then as you apply your brakes, the auto adjuster comes up and spins this whole thing. Spins it up, and each time you notice we're gaining a little bit more space in between here, and that's helping to tighten our brakes up. So now we're gonna go ahead and put all of this stuff back together, and we'll show you what it looks like all brand new. Okay, so I forgot to mention one little piece that's relatively important to the parking brake. Now you can see this little notch right here. This little notch right here actually accepts this guy. And this guy is just a little bar that runs in between the parking brake and the forward pad or the forward shoe. And this allows the brake shoes to be pushed apart, because if you didn't have this metal bar in there, then you'd be relying on the wheel cylinder. Now the wheel cylinder is hydraulically actuated. So if you pull the e-brake and it pushes up against the hydraulic cylinder, it's just gonna push brake fluid back. So you need to have some sort of a rod in there to actually allow for the movement of the brake shoes to be spread apart. So this hooks into the rear shoe, this hooks into the front shoe, and when you pull this e-brake, it leverages everything and pushes the shoes out. So very important that you make sure that this goes back in properly. Otherwise it'll scrape your hub, it'll scrape your wheel cylinder, it'll do all kinds of stuff, it won't fit right, and then you'll end up with sticky brakes and whatever else. So I always just put it right up here so I don't forget about it. So now I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall the pads, or reinstall the shoes. I'm sorry, I keep calling them pads. Reinstall the shoes, and once I get the shoes installed, we'll go through and we'll go step by step on replacing all of the little bits and pieces of hardware that go into this. All right, let's get you guys framed up just a little bit better here. You're a little tall. There you go. Much better. Okay, so now that we got the two brand new shoes on, we've got our little spring catches on, we put our little cross piece on back up there. We made sure that we have our center bar or our emergency brake bar running in there. We attached our emergency brake lever into the rear shoe. So now where I like to start with this is we do have to put on the auto adjustment cable, which is right here. It's this whole thing. I like to get that on there first and just kind of lay it in place. And you guys will see why in a second. Is because now our first spring that's going to go on is our spring that has that little cable guide. I'm trying to keep you guys in frame. It's got this little cable guide right here. And this has a little notch on the back that will fit right into the actual shoe. And then we can take our cable, run our cable right over the top of that, hook that over the center pin, and now while holding everything together, I can take, in my case, the vice grips, because that's what I like to use. And you can't see anything because my damn hand's in the way, but bear with me here. Take this and clamp it. And this was the last spring to come off, so this will be the first spring to go back on. And we'll pull it tight right over the center pin. Then we'll make sure we push back on it just to make sure that everything is seated properly and that we have room for the next spring. So now we can see our guide is in the right spot. Our cable is coming down to where we're going to need it. Now we can go ahead and put on the other spring. You just slip it in the hole there. That's what she said. Grab a hold of it, pull, and right around. And now these springs have two functions. Not only do they hold the shoes in place, but they also provide spacing to hold the center pin and the tops of the shoes in place. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to reinstall the adjuster that I dropped all over the floor. And I went ahead and I'll show you what I use on that if I can find it. It's around here somewhere. Always forgetting now that you guys can still hear me when I walk away from the camera, so we got to keep the flatulence to a minimum. But utilize this stuff. Silicone Ceramic Extreme Brake Parts Lubricant. And all we want to do is make sure that this adjuster, this pin, is well lubricated so that it rotates and doesn't rust or rot in place. And then we want to do the same with the threads on the lower half of the adjuster here. And again, this is where pictures are going to help you out big time, because it'll show you how to put this stuff back together. Now, I remember, because like I said, I've done these a million times. So now we can slide our adjuster in here, spread the bottoms of the pads of the shoes apart. There we go, caught myself on that one. And then bam, there we go. So the adjuster's in there. Now we can throw the self-adjuster spring into there. And we still got our cable hanging. Now we can throw our self-adjustment lever. And then bring our spring up around the lever. So there we go. There's our adjustment lever. And now this guy literally hooks inside of that adjuster. A little bit difficult to see, but it hooks down behind the spring. And there we go. And actually, surprisingly, that self-adjuster was not configured properly when the original brake job was done, because those brakes actually looked fairly new. But we're gonna replace them anyway. So now we have one more spring left, and that's this bottom spring. Spring goes from one side to the other. And I usually like to try to get everything else out of the way before I install this last spring, because that spring actually tends to get in the way of a lot if you put it in beforehand. You do have to do a little slipping and sliding to get it in there, but now that we've got that all set, we kind of bounce them around a little bit just to make sure that everything is set. We check our auto adjuster, that looks good. Our cable looks good. This is in its spot. That spring looks good. That spring looks good. Our shoes are sitting inside of our cylinder. And now the only thing we have left to do is put the drum on. So I'm gonna come over here and grab a brakey drum. If we can find a knife. I never have a knife in this place. I'm always using something I shouldn't be using to open things that I shouldn't be opening with the things that I shouldn't be opening. Oh, look, a razor blade. Yay. Okay. Get this open. Get that. Okay. Now, we have a brand spanking new drum. So we're just going to slide that over there, and it should slide with ease. But if it seems too easy, which it is, I like to do is get in here and turn, and hear the adjuster, turn that star wheel. We're still on there super easy. Still super easy. Oh, and there we go. So, what you want when you adjust drum brakes is a little bit of drag. And that little bit of drag will compensate for the amount of space that those shoes have to move in order to actuate the brakes. So you want to feel a little bit of drag, but you don't want it to where you can't turn it by hand without the tire on it. So we are, excuse me, at just that right amount of drag. You see this little weight is used to balance out the drums. So we're good on this side. We got everything good. And we want to make sure too that we can still pull the drum off of there, which we can. Nothing is stuck. Slides back on nice. And we have our little bit of drag. So this one is all adjusted up. We have no reason to go from the back side and adjust it, because you can adjust them literally while you're doing the brakes. If the wheels are still on it, then you'll use the screwdriver through the hole in the back and run the star wheel that way. So that's drum brakes in probably, I don't know, what's this video going to be, 30 minutes maybe? But yeah, they are very, very good when it comes to clamping force. They're very, very good when it comes to stopping power. However, they are very, very bad when it comes to heat soak, brake fade, excess heat, all kinds of stuff. So yes, they're still used on big trucks, 18-wheelers. They're still used on big dump trucks, heavy equipment, all kinds of stuff, and they're used solely front and rear. However, on passenger vehicles that are in stop and go traffic where these drums are very small, they get very hot very quick and lose their efficiency. So in most newer cars, you will now see disc brakes in the rear as well as disc brakes in the front. It's very rare nowadays to find drum brakes on anything, but if you happen to run into anything Jeep-wise, Chevy Silverados used rear drum brakes, I think all the way up until 2011 or 2012. Older Dodges, you know, all the old pickup trucks, the bigger pickup trucks use massive drum brakes in the rear. Some of the older dualies use massive drum brakes. So you will run into these things. It's not like you're not going to see them. And the biggest bit of advice that I can give you is the second you pull this drum off of the hub, take a picture of the entire brake setup. Whether you've done them, you know, 2 or 3 times or not, take a picture, because I guarantee you what's going to happen is you're going to take everything apart and then you're going to be going, uh-oh, now I got to go on the internet and find all of the breakdown of what this thing should look like, because I went ahead and took it all apart before I took pictures of it. So that is drum brakes. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I know it was a little wonky. In the beginning I couldn't talk. I've been having a massive issue speaking lately, and I just think it's because I've been so busy and so tired and so just worked. But that is basically a drum brake setup on a Jeep, and you guys will probably run into these at some point in your life where, you know, you're tasked with, hey, can you do my rear brakes for me? And you're like, yeah, no problem, I got you. And then you find out the drum brakes, and that's what you run into. But again, biggest thing I can tell you is take a picture of it. Take a picture with your phone, and you will not have an issue putting everything back together. There's tons of different ways to do this stuff, but take a picture. So hope you enjoyed that video. Not sure what we're going to be doing on the next video. We do have another Jeep here that needs a clutch, so maybe we'll do a clutch video, clutch replacement, and you know, we'll get a little bit deeper into some of the maintenance stuff on these Jeeps to help you guys out. We are actually going to be doing the front brakes as well, but there's really nothing spectacular about the front brakes. You literally have bolt, take the caliper off, put new pads on, put new rotors on, put the caliper back on, put 2 bolts in, and you're done. That's literally it. There's nothing more to this brake job. You don't even have to take the caliper brackets off because they're part of the knuckle. So 2 bolts, caliper off, pads off, rotor off, new rotor, new pads, caliper back on, 2 bolts, you're done. So disc brakes are super easy. Drum brakes, not so much. But if you enjoyed this video and you're not a subscriber, which a lot of you guys aren't, click that subscribe button. It helps the channel big time. It helps get the channel seen. It helps advertisers look at the channel, everything else. So subscriber count is huge. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to stick them down in the comments and I will answer everything that I possibly can. I will show you guys this spider for those of you who may be scared of spiders. He's just kind of chilling there. Whoops, he's a little camera shy. But yeah, so we'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for sticking around for these really long videos. I truly appreciate it. And hopefully you guys learned a little something about drum brakes. So we'll see you on the next one, guys. Have a great night.